Good day to everyone. Today at the New African Paradigm channel, my co-host Nick Jones and myself are extremely honored to introduce Lawrence Freeman, who is an internationally renowned physical economist and political analyst for Africa. He is the host of Lawrence Freeman Africa and the World.com, which is where you can find out more of his work. Good evening, Lawrence. How are you?
Pretty good. It's still morning over here.
Oh, yeah, good morning then. Good morning, Lawrence.
Sorry.
We're on the east side of the world.
Yes.
On the west side, sorry, west side.
Lawrence, I believe you've recently returned from a trip to both Ethiopia and Nigeria. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your experiences there.
First of all, I was able to, in Ethiopia, I'm usually stuck in the capital, Addis Ababa, but I changed my itinerary and I went to a city called Lalibela, which is not that far, about an hour plane ride north of Addis Ababa, and on the same route to Mekelle in Tigray. And it's an extraordinary place. It's, first of all, 7,400 feet altitude, and it's just surrounded by gorgeous mountain chains, which as a hiker and backpacker was very exciting to see. And then you drive another 200 to 300 feet up into a small village, and the whole village is 45,000 people exist around this 11 church structures, which took hewn, H-E-W-N, from rock. That is, they were not constructed upwards. They were built downwards, but not built, carved out of rock. Some of them are still attached to rock on one side, some were monolithic. And this was done in 1150, between 1150 and 1127 by King Lalibela, who had visited Jerusalem and the birthplace of Christ, and he wanted to reproduce that in Ethiopia. So he commissioned people to begin building these churches, which are all different and all unique. And then surrounding areas are called Mount Sinai. There's an area, a water area called Mount Jordan River. Everything is symbolic of Jerusalem and the beginning of Christianity. And the churches are just unbelievable. The magnificent structures, they're filled with icons. People were celebrating. I was there 2 days before the official beginning of Orthodox Easter in the latter part of April, and the last week in April. And there were thousands and thousands of people praying, leaning against a wall, reading the Bible out loud, kissing the wall. My guide and I walked through many different, all 11 churches filled with icons and books and paintings and rugs. And you just see the people just packed in there. And Christmas, Easter, which would have been a day or two after I left, would have been a huge celebration. Mm. It was an extraordinary spiritual experience for me. I mean, extraordinary. I had to sit down a couple of times to just take it in. And I'll give free publicity to anyone, to TripAdvisor. Go to Lalibela if you go to Africa, especially if you go to Ethiopia. And then I met in Ethiopia with people in the government, and I saw the progress that is being made in Addis, including a beautiful Unity Park, which is just, when Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed came in, the palace, which I'd seen from the outside on maybe 50 acres, was closed to the public and was filled with various military hardware. And the current Prime Minister, Abiy, he changed all that and took half of it, 25 acres, and turned it into a park representing the different 10 regional sections of the country. Wow. And there's animals there. I saw white lions, black maned lions, all kinds of animals, and beautiful flowers. Incredible arrangement. And this is just part of the new process that the Prime Minister is bringing in. But of course, Ethiopia is in difficult times, and that's something we may discuss later on.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I would say one thing that really struck me, and I've been discussing with some of my African friends when I return, is the essential premise of what Africa needs, actually, that I have believed for 30 years, actually was reinforced in Nigeria, because I stayed in Addis. I stayed in my own hotel, but I have some friends there that go back 10, 11 years, a former retired ambassador and his family, who are almost my family when I go there. And he lives in a government well-off area. And I spent 4 days in Kaduna with my oldest friend from 1994, very religious. And he also is not poor, and he lived in Kaduna. And what you see from both talking to these two individuals who are fairly intelligent is that people don't understand. The Africans don't have normal lives. They don't have electricity. Nobody has electricity, no matter how much money you have. You have generators outside your homes, but they can't provide power for freezers, and they can't provide powers for air conditioning. So you don't air condition at night. When I was trying to figure out a way to do it, one of my friends told me, you have to realize we just managed to survive here. And these people, neither one of them was poor. And both houses could not provide air conditioning at night. And both of them are juggling their power generators, their battery packs, which absorb electricity during the day so they can use it at night. And people don't have food. Now they did, of course. People don't have clean water. Basic necessities don't exist for hundreds of millions, if not the greater portion of the entire continent of 1.5 billion. And when people are making policy in the West, or even people in Africa, if you don't understand this question, and you're not willing to make the investment and have the political will to provide infrastructure in water, electricity, and food production, you're not addressing the problems, and you'll never solve any of the problems. The last thing I'll say on my trip was I had a sheer enjoyment of riding on a train in Africa, which since going there in 1994, I've only traveled by plane and by car. It was from Abuja to Kaduna. It was 100 miles, 160 kilometers. Took us 2 hours, no stops, no problem on the track, beautiful, clean cars. And it was just sheer delight to be on a train. And this was built by the Chinese, and the Chinese are building a whole two systems in Africa, one from Abidjan to Lagos, to Kaduna, to Kano, to Niger, another one along the southern coast. And this, again, has to be done. And the fact that the West not only refuses to do it, but maligns and slanders Africa for working with China to build infrastructure.
Exactly, yeah.
Shows how far the West has shrunk in its vision and its outlook since the times of John F. Kennedy, which is 60 years ago. So those are some salient points from a very pleasant 3 weeks in Africa. It was very hot though. In Nigeria, it was 100 to 105 degrees every day.
Wow.
Whoa.
Yeah.
And I bet it's a super humid 105 degrees as well.
No, it was rather dry.
Oh, nice.
And then of course, Ethiopia has a great climate. I mean, 60s at night, 70s during the day.
It's the highlands. It's the highland climate. It's beautiful. Yeah. And Kenya's the same.
So I put on my hat and my shorts, and I walk miles and miles in Kaduna and miles in Abuja, because that's how I learn and talk to people.
Yeah, you map it out.
Got to get out.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Larry, tell us more about Ethiopia. Or could I ask, what would you say between the two countries? I guess you would agree that they're both currently the powerhouses in infrastructure development on the continent. There's a couple of other countries that are included in that alongside them. But what would you say are some of the differences or similarities between how the two countries are going about this necessary development process, which you just spoke about, the infrastructure development, that it what is required to get these nations off the ground and to actually have a foundation where people can, you know, independently generate the good that they need to have prosperity and so on and so forth in their lives.
Yeah, just to have the basic necessities of life. And
yeah,
going back to the Nigerian example, I mean, both these individuals are supporters of the government. I mean, they're not rebels or pushing another line. And they say, why can't the government give us electricity and water? Why? And again, this is something that's very basic. In Nigeria, the security problem is acute. It's very serious, and there's a lot of debate on that, on how, whether it's made progress or not made progress. It's a real major difficulty which the government has not solved. But what President Buhari, Muhammadu Buhari, has done is working very closely with the Chinese. They are building train systems, I mean rail systems all over the country. The country's economic development is very uneven. It appears that in states where you have a certain quality of leadership from the governor, progress is made, in other areas not so much. But they are embarked on a very aggressive infrastructure program. They're also embarked on a very aggressive program of food production, because Nigeria, and this is a problem all over Africa, was importing everything from toothpicks to tomato paste. And the president has really cracked down and said, no, we have to produce ourselves. I don't have the quantitative measurements of that yet, but I'm told there has been progress in that area. Energy production, they're working with the Chinese on a new plant, the Mama Bella, but it's a disaster. Maybe, I'm guessing, maybe the 7,000 megawatts, maybe less than that, actually gets circulated each day for 210 billion people. That's not going to work. That is a serious, serious problem. And of course, the security problems are related to the economic problems. In Ethiopia, it's a different kind of situation, because Ethiopia did not have the basis of revenue production that the Nigerians had from oil since the 1960s, 1970s. And in many ways, Ethiopia would be considered a poorer country without any major resource except water. And they, under the leadership of Meles Zenawi, who now is being questioned because of the leadership of his party over many years from Tigray, he nevertheless developed the theory of the developmental state and had an understanding that the marketplace could not dictate development in his country. And he articulated this. So from my standpoint, he was the most conscious African leader I've ever read, probably outside of Kwame Nkrumah, of the president of Ghana, on this question. He understood the limitations of the marketplace, and they embarked. I mean, they built their first east-west, from Djibouti to Addis Ababa, electrified rail system in sub-Saharan Africa. They are now going to, in about 2 to 3 weeks, they're going to begin the second filling of the Ethiopian Grand Renaissance Dam. So they are very bold thinkers. Their history is much different. The Nigerian state was cobbled together by the British and never really became a nation state. And people are still questioning today if it is a full nation state.
Right.
And Ethiopia was never conquered. Menelik II defeated the Italian army on March 1st, 1896. And because of that, they have, I believe, they have a bolder, a more aggressive mindset. The Nigerians are very much still, they were inculcated by British oligarchical thinking, like many of the countries in either Francophone or Anglophone in Africa, but the Ethiopians weren't. Now they're undergoing a very severe crisis now of ethnic regionalism, and that could get worse before it gets better, I'm not sure. And of course, I'm very much involved in trying to help them solve that problem. So the two countries are different in their history and the development, but they're both embracing in different ways infrastructure development, and they're both doing it with China. They're open to the West. They ask for the West, but the West is asleep, out to lunch, doesn't understand, and from looking at the G7 communiques, I don't think still understands what has to be done.
Yeah, no, they don't seem to understand. I just wondered if you'd heard anything about Siemens signing a cooperation agreement with the Nigerian government on electricity generation and production, that they were going to try and sort out the grid, like the actual, yeah.
I didn't have anything on that in terms of discussion. A lot of my discussions with the government in Abuja were on trying to secure the feasibility study for my project, not mine, but one I've been working on for a quarter of a century, Transact.
Which we're going to talk about in a moment, absolutely. Just to bring you back to the GERD, which you mentioned just before in Ethiopia, the GERD, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Tell us some of the challenges there. I know there's a bit of an issue going on with Egypt and Sudan. I think this comes from largely from historical problems, maybe treaties that were signed in colonial era or so on and so forth. So there's some historical issues that are to be worked out there. Could you take us through, again, some of the challenges and also the potential of GERD as a regional power hub, how it can, transform East Africa into productive in electricity generation and able to, supply other nations with electricity too.
Right. Yeah, the GERD, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, is again, it's another product of the mindset of Ethiopia, and this is almost $5 billion financed by Ethiopians. No loans from the IMF, no loans from the World Bank, no loans from the West. It really is a question. It has emerged as a question of national identity. And in fact, some people, and including myself, I accept this comparison to the Battle of Adwa in 1896. It embodies what Ethiopia aspires to be. And it's not going to be stopped. Now, it's not fully completed. They keep building up the wall, but I think maybe its capacity would be about 74 billion cubic meters of water, which is very close to the amount of water that flows in the Nile, south to north, from the Great Lakes up to the Mediterranean. And the water that's being dammed is right near the Ethiopian-Sudan border. And it's coming from Lake Tana through the Blue Nile, which provides 80% of the Nile when it meets the White Nile just north of Khartoum. And it's perfectly legitimate sovereign right for Ethiopia to use its water for development. By the way, none of this is going to be used for agriculture. So it's strictly a pass through. None of it's going to be blocked. The difficulty is the filling process. Yeah. Because you have to hold back a certain amount of rainwater to fill it, to get the power from the dam itself.
Sorry, Lawrence, did you say that none of it was being used for agriculture?
There's no plans to use any of the GERD for agriculture.
Okay. So it's just purely to generate electricity.
It's going to come down from the head, down past the turbines, and back into the Nile and continue its flow south to north.
So why would Egypt have any beef with it?
Well, the historical reasons, there are geopolitical reasons. From the standpoint of simple water economics, the complaint being made is that by the filling of the dam, that is, that'll reduce the flow of the Nile, and that the Egyptians will not have enough water at the Aswan Dam for their electrical power generation. The problem with that argument is, one, is the flow of the Nile is always dependent on rain. I mean, this is the limitation of hydropower, which electrical energy is much better. So nobody can predict the rain. The Ethiopians have no intention, and I tell all my friends in Sudan and Egypt who may be watching, the Ethiopians have no intention of holding back water. They are extended the filling period. Instead of doing it in 2 to 3 years, they extended it to 4 to 7 years. And there is no indication yet that any water will be held back because it depends on the rain. Now, last June, July, without anyone even knowing it, the Ethiopians did the first filling, which was 4 billion cubic meters.
You can actually see it already on Google Maps if people want to go look.
Really?
Yes.
And it had no water flow of the Nile because the rains were so heavy, nobody could tell, except when they looked at it from Google Maps, from satellite projection.
Right, yeah.
You couldn't tell because the rain was extraordinarily heavy rain. No one knows what the rain is going to be. Now, the second filling is supposed to take place in July, which the rainy season begins end of June, July in Ethiopia. I think it's something like 13.9 or 14 billion cubic meters. But again, nobody knows what the rain will be. Now, the key question is with the Egyptian and Sudanese, and they have different positions on this, what they're trying to get from Ethiopia is a signed agreement in advance that so much water will be delivered to the Aswan Dam. Now they move from a question of the dam to water guaranteed allocation. And of course, the Ethiopians cannot sign that agreement.
No.
Because, and the Egyptians are saying, you have to sign an agreement that says we will get so much water. And I've told my Sudanese friends, it would be wrong. If Ethiopia did that, the country would there'd probably be a revolution right there. You can't make that kind of agreement. It's all based on water. But the fact of the matter, the Ethiopians are very flexible. They looked at drought years. They've looked at non-drought years. They've put together averages. These are all scientific, technical questions, which are not really political. They are really engineering questions and meteorological questions.
Would you say that the Egyptians are being lured into the ideology of scarcity of resources, of water, that there's not enough to go around, so we all have to fight over it? Are they being lured into that way of thinking by a foreign power?
Well, it's interesting because I put in my last article a statement from the Prime Minister, Shoki is his name, and he, in one interview, said, we will not have a water problem with the filling of the dam. And in fact, the dam could be a water bank for Sudan and Egypt during dry years because it's going to have inside it the equivalent of the Nile River, 74 billion cubic meters.
Right.
So there's something else going on. Now, there's two different ways, there's two different situations with Sudan and Egypt, by the way, who have formed a military alliance, the two of the countries.
Yes, I saw this, yeah.
And they've actually had military exercises labeled Guardians of the Nile. And they're trying to recruit Djibouti into this. They're actually trying to recruit Kenya and Uganda. But I don't think any sub-Saharan country is going to support Egypt against Ethiopia, because you will get 6,200 megawatts max, which already been allocated for export to Kenya, South Sudan, Sudan.
Yeah.
Now, Sudan has no basis of joining this alliance with Egypt, because I've been to Sudan maybe 10 times, and half the time the Nile is dry. Half the time it's flooded, and people could die in Sudan floods. They die.
Yeah.
This will eliminate.
They die from the drought. They die from the flooding.
Exactly. The GERD will eliminate that. You will have a regulated flow.
Yeah, from the very source, actually.
Right, and Sudan will get the electricity.
Also.
So in my position, my mind is, I think Sudan, and I love Sudan. I spent a long time there. Nevertheless, they're being manipulated, I think, by the West, who now has virtually taken over their country finances after they have made this agreement to recognize Israel and then taken off the terrorist list. They're now being given money, but they've lost their sovereignty.
Yeah.
But they actually have no objective reason for protesting the GERD, because they will get electricity and regulated flow of water, both of which they don't have right now. Egypt is a different question.
Yeah.
Don't forget, I think it was Queen Victoria. If she was still the queen in 1903, who gave the Egyptians control over the Nile. Then in 1929, you had a water agreement under the auspices of the British Empire still, because Egypt and Sudan were both under the Anglo-Egyptian condominium of 1899. And they had a meeting under the auspices of the British Empire. I think the Queen Victoria was probably passed by that time. And they divided up the Nile, giving 19 billion cubic meters to Sudan, 59 to Egypt. And I think the total is 84 billion, but they lose 10 billion in evaporation, which, by the way, will also be reduced because the
Nile, with the dam.
Gird is very high up, so the evaporation will decrease. So Egypt and Sudan divide up their portion, of which Sudan has never fully utilized its portion. Then there was another agreement in 1959. Now, by 1959, Nasser already a revolution freed Egypt from British nominally, and Sudan actually became an independent state in 1956. But it was the same water agreement. Now, what's interesting about both water agreements is Ethiopia wasn't there. And the unspoken word, and sometimes spoken privately, but not in legislation, was that Ethiopia could not put a stick in the dam to prevent water because it all belonged to Egypt and Sudan, even though 85% of the volume comes from the Blue Nile from Lake Tana. And this is what the Egyptians still believe. And they believe they have some colonial rights. Now, they're whipping up their country, and there's been military threats, which would be...
Yeah, they have. Serious one. Yes, talking about blowing up the dam and such things, which are ridiculous, but yeah.
Yes, it'd be a real tragedy. So even though Sisi, the president of Egypt, has done some good things in expanding the canal and development projects, I have to break with him here because he's playing a very bad role with his military threats.
Yeah.
And now it's been kicked over to the AU. You have two problems. One is under President Trump, he put his support on the side of Egypt.
Yeah.
And when he was congratulating Sudan on their recognition of Israel, he blurted out publicly that Egypt may blow up the dam. Well, when you have the president of the United States making a statement like that, that's almost a green light. And that was very bad.
Yeah.
And then what you had at the Senate hearings took place last month in the U.S. Senate, you had Senator Mendez, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, saying a similar thing. Well, I understand that the Egyptians are militarily going to strike this. Rather than saying, no, this is unacceptable, we will not allow it. And they, don't forget, Egypt is the second biggest recipient of loans in the world from the United States. Rather than putting their foot down against it, they throw it out as if it's a possibility. And situation between Ethiopia and the United States has gone very bad over the last few months under Biden, even though Biden himself didn't make that kind of egregious remark, others have. So it's a very dicey area. The Ethiopians are coming up with elections on the 21st, and then the filling of the dam will probably take place sometime in July. These are going to be two pivotal events for the future of Ethiopia, and I would say for the future of East Africa.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant points. Thank you, Larry. Yeah, Pip.
Sorry, it's just so contrary, isn't it, to the whole idea of Africa uniting and this new paradigm that we talk about, because there's Ethiopia could be supplying all this energy to neighboring countries. Okay, Egypt is 100% electrified, but it still needs more.
Of course.
And it's falling apart.
If you look in one of my articles, I put down the amount of water, cubic meters of water per member per capita in Egypt, which is similar to Ethiopian size, maybe 5-10 million people less, 110 million in Ethiopia, 103 million in Egypt. But the per capita water consumption is huge in Egypt compared to Ethiopia. So they're not using, and they're not using the water yet. This is the first effort by Ethiopia to use what I consider its most significant resource.
Yeah.
Water.
Yeah.
They have they have a lot of water systems. Some of them run into the White Nile across South Sudan. And the fact that you would tell a country that you can't use your most precious resource, and the arguments are just, I mean, people get whipped up over the arguments, but clinically, they fall flat.
They fall completely
no
flat.
Justification for this, except.
But then, you know, you think South Africa is one of the richest countries in terms of coal in the world, and they are effectively being told they cannot use their coal. So it's almost like this is an attack on development. It's not necessarily an attack on South Africa's coal deposits or GERD. It's an attack on development. It's an attack on the ability to produce energy.
Correct.
And therefore raise the standard of living.
Yeah.
Right. And that's your problem. Your problem is geopolitical thinking, which is very, very narrow. It's a question of who's on top and who's on bottom. There's no understanding that the world itself is a living, breathing development organism. And that policies from all countries, but especially from the developing sector, should be to feed and advance that development, that growth. You know, sometimes called anti-entropic growth, negative entropic growth, where you're not, it's not collapsing, it's growing, it's expanding, it's developing, and this is the potential.
Higher order.
Right. So if you were intelligent and not dominated by geopolitical thinking, you would say, well, what kind of policy do we design that is coherent with that growing process? Instead, you have exactly the opposite, as you're pointing out in South Africa, as we see here in the United States. Just is so stupid and narrow in their thinking that they have no conception of development. I listened to the Senate hearings for about an hour and a half on Ethiopia, and I was ashamed that these people are my U.S. senators. I mean, not from the state of Maryland per se, although one of them, Senator Cardin, does come from Maryland. But on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I mean, the lack of understanding and the hypocrisy of, oh, we have this situation in Tigray, you know, people are starving, we can't let this go on. Who's accountable? Who caused this? And I'm saying to myself, you've been sitting back for 20 years watching people starve in Ethiopia, starve in Sudan, starve, and that never concerned you to have a hearing. And yet these so-called, we call in the US, crocodile tears of concern. So the problem is a real absence of thinking. And I think the founding fathers who wrote the Constitution, they would be very disappointed, because the United States Republic its success depended on thinking people and thinking leaders. And we're suffering massively in both categories.
And there's just a massive lack of humility and reflection in that political system right now.
And a lot of
the so-called climate crisis, you know, the other day somebody very environmentally brainwashed said that the people living in Africa were living earth friendly. This was the best thing for the planet, for them to continue hoeing their fields with a donkey and walking 6 miles to get water. But for them, this was wonderful because the planet wasn't going to boil over.
Right.
But therefore, that is anti-development, isn't it?
Yeah.
Purely anti-development. And
not just anti-development. I mean, it's bordering on pure racism. I mean, straight up, isn't it? At the end of the day, like, the first question I would ask that person is, have you done that lately? Have you done any of those activities lately? When's the last time you went camping even? Like that's why things like camping are such a great experience, right? Because it teaches you how vulnerable you are without anything.
How hard it is to sleep when you've got mosquitoes biting you all night.
Right. So you realize how indefensible you are to nature's will. And that's the thing. Like, if people actually went and tried that, and then try that in a desert, on top of that, in 40-degree heat, like Larry was saying just before, you know, over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, like some serious temperatures, and people, you know, not any people, women majorly are doing hard labor in this weather. Most men in the West could not do what African women are capable of doing daily. I know I, for one, would collapse after a couple of days.
But
So
we've become moral morons.
moral morons, there you
We are
go.
moral morons in the West.
Self-righteous morons.
Well,
Yes, self-righteous
speaking,
morons.
I must say, some of my African friends I work with here in the United States, not African Americans, that's a whole different subject,
Yeah.
but Africans, they say one of my advantages, although it's only one, because my idea
All of society, because the infrastructure is for everyone. So whether you're rich, poor, or middle class in Africa, a lot of people are dealing with the same issues.
yeah,
They,
you can't you
blackouts, for
can't,
example, they are
you
widespread
can't
across
produce
Nigeria.
right, because you can't produce electricity with currency. You have to build power plants. You have to build a power
Brilliant.
plant.
Yeah.
And I would say for Africa, contrary to what the Greens say, I think the way to go is absolutely nuclear energy. I build 1,000 gigawatt plants across the continent.
Yeah.
The transition to that is to use everything you've got. Use hydropower limitations, burn every coal you can find, burn gas you can find, burn oil, burn it all to give people electricity as we transition into nuclear energy. Now, that statement I just made is so blasphemous that I could be stoned if I said that.
You could be stoned through the streets of Maryland.
But the problem, fact of the matter is, human life is sacred.
Yes.
And anything we can do to sustain and build and grow and nurture human life, because human life is the human mind, we are obligated to do it. And that until we come to the next level of technology, we have to use everything we've got.
Yeah. And the sooner we use it, the sooner we get to nuclear and even better fusion, in which case, we don't have to worry about clean or dirty energy anymore. Yes.
Lawrence, if whilst on the subject of mega infrastructure, could you please tell the viewers about the project that you've been associated with for 30 years, 35 years now, and how that could completely transform the interior of Africa?
Yeah, this is one of those visionary, bold, transformative projects, which was not thought up by an African, but thought up by an Africanist. That is someone who wanted to help Africa. His name is Marcello Vicky. And when he was a young man in his late 30s, early 40s, he developed this project called Transaqua. He said, how do we bring water to the Sahel, which is dry? And he looked at the map, and he was a scientist and engineer, and he had some hydrologists working with him. And they said, let's take some of the water from a super wet region, the Congo Basin, which at that time 1.9 trillion cubic meters of water flowed. Now, it could be less now, probably is. But at that time, it was 1.9 trillion. He said, let's take 100 billion of that and create a canal and send it north. So it would go canal on the right side of the Congo River, a navigable canal, wide enough and deep enough for ships, go into Central African Republic, make Central African Republic a Bangui, which is a river city capital, make that a major dry port industrial production center. And then the water flows into the Chari River, and the Chari River releases its water into Lake Chad, and his computations were that the lake could be taken back up to 25,000 square kilometers from its contraction of a couple of thousand square kilometers. In the 1960s, it was at 25,000. I mean, thousands of years earlier.
Yeah, it was even bigger.
It was a mega lake. Took up most of the Sahel, or a good portion of it. So this was an engineering task. And it's been, lying there since the 1980s. He personally took it around sub-Saharan Africa himself and went to various governments, but no one wanted to take it up. And Schiller Institute picked up on it. I picked up on, others have, and we've been fighting for it. And finally, in 2014, I was invited out to N'Djamena, the capital of Chad, to join the Scientific Advisory Council of the Lake Chad Basin Commission and work with them on it. I met with the water minister of Nigeria, we had a number of discussions in the United States and in Africa and in Italy and Paris on these questions. And we finally had a conference in 2018 to save Lake Chad. I was a key featured speaker along with heads of state and President Buhari, and was agreed we'd go with this project. The Italian government offered 1.5 million euros for the feasibility. All we're trying to do is get a feasibility study.
Yeah.
And then nothing happened after that. MOUs were signed between Italy and the Lake Chad Basin Commission, the Italian Minister of Environment, and those were left, so they lapsed. They expired after 2 years. On my last trip, I said, I've got to get this thing restarted. So I met with people in the government, initiated some lines of communication, but frankly, it may not happen still. And the danger is at the end of the month, we lose 1.5 million euros. It's in a special fund now for this project.
Right.
It'll go back to the general treasury. The beauty of the project is it involves about a dozen states between the Great Lakes states and the Lake Chad Basin, a super arid region in the desert, and a super wet region fed by the Great Congo River. And you would create an industrial zone that would be the largest, would be a mega zone of manufacturing, agricultural, fisheries, industrial centers, energy production, navigation, trade, commerce, that would essentially consume 1/3 of the continent land area in this project, and would therefore spill over and create a complete change in Africa. Plus, if you look at the way that the canal would be built, it would cross over the east-west and north-south not only highways, but eventually rail systems, high-speed rail systems. So you would have the most intense energy, economic, manufacturing, agricultural development on the continent on a third of the land area. And this is what was called at the conference the Kwame Nkrumah Project, because this is what he advocated when he was leading the continent. And yet, the only single country in the world that has shown any signs of wisdom is Italy.
Yeah.
This doesn't appear anywhere in the United States. There was a private meeting by the military at Fort McNair by the National Defense University. And I was invited there were 6 of us in this meeting because of my knowledge on Lake Chad. No one knows what's the importance of this project or even what's going on. If we had any brains, we would put the United States stamp on this project and say, we're behind it 100%, let's go. But we don't think that way. And even inside of Nigeria, something is going on, which I don't know and I don't understand, that we can't even mobilize the full power of the government behind this, even though the President Buhari has told me personally that he's behind it. Mm. These are very frustrating because I can see it would take 10, 20 years, but you would see a change before the end of this, well before the end of this century, by the time we get to 2050, when the population is supposed to be 2.5 billion. These projects are so obvious to me of what has to be done. It's so simple, so clear, and yet we don't have the will and we don't have the commitment in Africa. I mean, Transact was not even on the 2063 agenda program of the AU. They don't even fully understand it.
But Lawrence, could you please put to rest for once and for all this issue of debt? So I know Nigeria, they're talking about debt. There's a lot of debt has been accrued through building their amazing national railway grid. And this issue of debt always comes up. This has cost so much. Now the country's in so much debt. Could you put into an understandable phrase what it means when you build infrastructure like railroads, waterways, water care, even highways, roads, anything, any form of infrastructure, and what that means in terms of the physical economy, as you are a physical economist? Can you explain that? The issue, the question of debt no longer has any significance.
Well, with the flip side of debt the other side of it is debt is credit when properly used. Now, the mistake that we have is we really virtually have nobody in government and nobody in the population who has any understanding of actual economics. People think economics is how much money you make selling stocks on the stock market, or how clever you
speculation,
or what the CEO of Amazon has done, which is figured out a fast way to get people consumer goods. Economics starts from the standpoint of how do you increase the standard of living of the population? How do you produce more goods in the succeeding physical production cycle than you did in the prior production cycle? And debt, properly used, is credit. You extend credit over time for the realization of those projects. The reason that credit has to be long-term low interest for infrastructure, not 12, 15% when you're borrowing money to invest on the stock market, is because it takes that long for the project to be built and longer for the project to be realized in its increase in productivity, i.e. profitability of the economy. If the project is profitable, then the economy grows. How do we know the economy grows? Because we'll have increased physical production of tangible goods of wealth for the population to consume and for industry. And we'll be doing it more efficiently and increasing the output from one production cycle to the next. That's how we know the economy is growing. It increases productivity of production. And therefore, that's the definition of profitability. And the profitability will lead to increased sales. And that's how you pay back the debt. The Chinese figured this out. Now, don't know the history of how it came to this conception. I mean, you can go back to Sun Yat-sen, maybe further.
Yeah.
But they figured it out. It is what the United States did and understood under Alexander Hamilton. Lincoln studied the American system. He read, in fact, he was a follower of the American system from the time he was, even before he was when he was in his teens. And
I mean,
20.
Henry C. Carey is his economics advisor, right?
Well, yes, but when he was when he was in his teens,
right?
He already adopted the idea of the Whigs. The Whigs believed in internal improvements and infrastructure. This was so well known in the United States that it was clearly defined, and it came from Alexander Hamilton's original economic scientific principles.
Yep.
This is lost now. I mean, the last president and discussed it thoroughly was Roosevelt. John F. Kennedy was a follower of Roosevelt. Wonderful pictures of him looking at Roosevelt's portrait down in Georgia, where the little White House was, where Roosevelt would work on his paralyzed legs. These conceptions were known. They're not known now. Nobody knows in the United States. I mean, we're basically dealing with, on the question of economics, we're dealing with mental pygmies. They just don't understand any of the rudimentary conceptions of wealth. Wealth is not money. Wealth is
Keynesian economics.
Wealth is the growth of the economy measured in the increased standard of living of the population. So for me, it is clear. So yes, you're going to create debt. Debt can be good. The problem with these silly politicians is they'll say, oh, we got to get back to kitchen table politics. Every family knows how much money it has and therefore cannot spend more than it brings in. So the husband and wife sit down at the kitchen table and they look at their finances and they say, well, we're spending too much money this year, honey, this month. We have to cut back on our expenses. And then congressmen and senators say, that's the basis of understanding economics. That has nothing to do with economics.
No.
Zero, nothing. Economics is how do you create something in the future which doesn't exist in the present. Households can't do that. They can by investing in their children, and which not enough parents do. But you don't have, in the government, when you're a sovereign government, you don't have the restrictions of a family budget. Your responsibility is to think 20, 40 years into the future. That's why you were elected.
Yeah.
And that's what you should be doing. And you will create debt to do that. And if the debt is properly organized, long-term, low interest. The Chinese are offering 15-year loans at 3% interest per year, followed by grace periods. That's what you need to do. And which is really nothing but an attack on China. I don't know if I'd be happy if they did it, but if they did it, they have to give up their adherence to Wall Street dominating the financial situation in our country, because Wall Street will never approve of a 15-year loan at 3%. They want to make 15% in 24 hours. So I wish Biden would do it, but I don't think they will. And I think it's somewhat of a farce. And I don't think they're really committed to development. We'll see, but it doesn't look like it from the communiques I read. But they don't understand economics. Our congressmen don't understand economics. Our senators and the African leaders don't understand economics. Very few people do. And it's up to us to educate them.
Yeah.
Even South African economists, they don't understand. I mean, there's a very high level South African economist, and he said that the future is uncertain and that therefore we mustn't plan for it.
Well, why would Africans have any better basis than anyone else? This idea of the science of economics, Hamiltonian economics, or known as the American system, this is not understood by the majority, or let's put it the other way, it's only a very small number of people who might understand it. And it doesn't matter where you come from. If you haven't been taught, if you haven't been educated, you don't know it. Somehow, people have understood this. You certainly saw this from reading what Kwame Nkrumah did. There's certainly, this was clear to me from reading Melo Zenoway's writings. I used to know a very, very good friend of mine, Sam Aluko, who understood this in Africa. He was an economist in Nigeria, but it's very far and few between. We have to do the education work ourselves and try to get people past the point of thinking how they're going to make money tomorrow to how they're going to build a better future 20, 40 years from now.
Yeah, and also to get away from this idea of making, like you said, Larry, it's really important to get away from this idea of making money. People should be more interested in making produce, making something which is productive and actually generates something good for society, whether it be agriculture, technology, science, whatever industry someone may be looking into. It's good to put these economics actually into practice and to see how far it can go, because actually when you put people to good labor, you will get a good product, and that is real economics, you will make a profit. And it's all very simple, actually. I wanted to touch on, well, you mentioned speculation. I mean, Wall Street just printed $8 trillion over the space of a pandemic. Now that 8 trillion could have very easily been put in, you could have taken half of it, right, and put it into a credit facility, like a kind of new international banking function that would provide credit to developing nations, not just Africa, because it's a worldwide issue, infrastructure. Sure, even Asia, China seems to struggle to cater for all of the infrastructural development needed in Asia, let alone. So if they'd taken that 4 trillion instead of using it to speculate further on the stock market, which we all see the product of that, the stock market has just gotten bigger, but it's not real product. The companies are not getting bigger reality wise, they are just ever extending their stock growth. So why could we not just take that money and spend it on actual and the future? And that's what Lincoln said, right? Because Pip, your quote from, I can't remember who you said that was from, but like the future looks unpredictable. So
the future is uncertain. Yes,
the future is uncertain.
Stand for it.
Right.
Yes.
Whereas Lincoln said, as the kind of opposite to that, like it's very hard to predict the future. So the best way to do it is to create it.
Lovely.
Right.
It's the complete opposite, an optimistic approach to life and therefore economics. Create the change you wish to see, which is what Gandhi said, right? In a more spiritual nuance. So all of these leaders, all of these icons that have been dancing through history have very much said it in one way or another. And now we just need to act on it. It's not enough just to wear a Martin Luther King t-shirt anymore, people. We have to actually act on his words and, create the change we wish to see. And So, just to bring us to an end today, Larry, I wanted to ask you just to leave the floor open now. Was there anything else you would like to touch on today and to inform our readers, our listeners, as well as readers out there, like current developments or future developments, or just something general that you want to talk about regarding Africa and your enormous amount of work that you've done there over the past decades? Yeah.
Well, right now, the United States is embarking on a very bad, dangerous policy because they have no understanding of the history of Africa or any significant region of Africa. I'm pointing to the situation in Ethiopia because now under the leadership of Secretary of State Blinken and the House of Representatives and the US Senate have all been advocating and in fact have now implemented sanctions, still limited, but sanctions against Ethiopia. And there are reports of famine in Tigray where there's conflict going on, which I don't myself have not convinced are actually totally accurate. But you have a very difficult situation in the country because you have, which unfortunately was set up by the same leadership that boldly saw the understanding of the state government's role in building the economy, also compromised and set up regional ethnic states in Ethiopia. So ethnicity is really ethno-nationalism, where some of these ethnic cultures believe they are the state or the equivalent of the state. It's sort of the worst case of states' rights in the United States in the 1820s and 30s and 40s leading up to the Civil War, where they thought they were the sovereignty, not the government. So this is a very serious crisis, and the United States is not only not playing a helpful role, but if the United States does not support the current government, whatever flaws they see in Prime Minister Abiy, if they don't support the present government and they contribute to weakening the government, then they are going to contribute to the potential breakup of Ethiopia, where it isn't just a Tigray, which is actually the smallest, one of the smallest ethnic groups in Ethiopia, about 6, 7 million, 8 million people. But the Oromo, the Amhara, they could cause a crisis where the government collapses and you have warring fiefdoms bent based on ethnic culture, or ethnicity, or ethno-nationalism. Yeah. This breakup of Ethiopia of 110 million people would overwhelm East Africa.
Yeah.
And would Sudan, South Sudan, Kenya, Tanzania, everything. The fact that there is nobody in our government, the US government, who understands this danger, I shouldn't say nobody, very few people. But the fact of the matter is that the leading Democrat and Republican and the president and the Secretary of State and all the people that he's appointed to his cabinet are willing to contribute to the undermining of this country, which is trying to hold itself together, is very, very tragic that the United States would be reduced to this because they have no understanding of what's going on in Ethiopia. And the policy, rather than contributing to policies of development, they're actually contributing to the policies that could lead to the dismemberment. And if Ethiopia were to go in that direction, I'm not saying it will, it would be a catastrophe. The only catastrophe in Africa that I could think would be worse would be if there was the breakup of Nigeria. And that's another similarity that we discussed very early in the discussion, which is that, Nigeria is struggling after many, many years between its ethnic groupings. And there's all kinds of discussions in Nigeria because in Nigeria, the Hausa, the Yoruba, the Igbo do not yet identify with Nigeria as the nation state. And in Ethiopia, you have this similar problem. The Tigrayans are open about this, the TPLF, the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, and other nationalities. So this was deliberately set up. In the case of Nigeria, it was set up intentionally by the British so that there is no strong nation state. And in Ethiopia, it wasn't set up quite the same way, but it has come into existence because of flawed thinking, and it was embodied in the 1995 Ethiopia Constitution to set up regional ethnic groups. This Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, is trying to move past that. He created the Prosperity Party, which is non-ethnic based. If people understood what's really going on in Ethiopia and Africa and understood what the future could be, the United States policy would not be to undermine and sanction and threaten and in some cases openly support Egypt's brinkmanship against Ethiopia. It's very destructive what the U.S. policy is for Africa right now. Yeah. And unfortunately, the people running the policy in the UN, in the State Department, in USAID and other areas do not understand this, or they maybe do understand it and they're willing to let this happen.
Yeah.
The most recent example we have in our memory is 2011, when under the Obama administration, Susan Rice, who was head of the Africa section, Hillary Clinton, Secretary of State, Samantha Powers, who is now head of USAID, United States, and others advocated against the military, against the Defense Department, which was headed up by Robert Gates at that point, for not only the bombing and removal of Gaddafi, but also the assassination of Gaddafi. North Africa has never recovered. There's thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people have suffered or died and continue. The whole Sahel, as weak as it was before then, has been transformed into a nightmare by this action by the liberal democratic government of President Obama and all the people around him. This, what is being discussed in Ethiopia, could be that bad and probably worse. And I'm hoping that wiser heads prevail in the US and we pull back from creating another catastrophe for Africa and actually begin to support policies for development. That's what I'm working for. I'm working towards. Now there's discussions going on this week between Ethiopia and the United States. I'm not privileged to what they are. I understand. Yeah, I understand there's a high-level Ethiopian delegation in the United States, and hopefully we'll work out a better policy. But the elections are next Monday, the 21st.
Well, okay. Yes, so fast, so soon. So it's all eyes on that. We've got what, 6 days?
So
any immediate thoughts on that? Like, how do you see it going? Do you think Abiy has a good chance, given that he's done so much already for the country?
Yes, well, there's very certain the Tigray region will not be in this election, and there's some other areas because of the instability. Right. Most likely the Prosperity Party will get at least a plurality, if not a majority, but they'll at least get a plurality. And I think the group in the government will remain. However, it depends on how aggressive these ethno-nationalist rebel groups are. I mean, there's no equivalency between them and the government, just like there was no equivalency between the Confederacy and the Union. President Lincoln never called them the Confederacy. He only called them one name, rebels. And he would never negotiate with them. He said the only negotiations is complete unconditional surrender. The question is, will the Abiy Prosperity Party, which I believe will come out on top, or will they be strong enough to hold the country together? And will the people trying to break up the country be weak enough so that it doesn't occur? And will world powers come to support what Abiy's trying to do? The Chinese and Russians have not gone along with this, and the Africans haven't gone along with attacks on Abiy. The US is leading it with Great Britain and the Europeans following behind. Then after that, if we can make it through that period, there's a long process of dialogue where, and I would offer to participate, where we have to actually have a discussion in Ethiopia, among Ethiopians, not me, and the government, that says what is ethno-nationality, what is citizenship in a nation state, because it's not clear that Ethiopians people understand this, just like in Nigeria. So there has to be a discussion of why the nation state transcends ethnicity, doesn't cancel it, You don't
No.
you don't cancel the culture that goes back
No.
thousands of years, but you have there's a different conception, it's a different idea, it's a different entity, institution. The nation has responsibility for all its people. And why is it that we have so many Ethiopians that don't identify with the nation? That is a discussion that has to be had. Hopefully people will be calm about it, but it has to happen and has to be open and rational. And it's going to take years to bring about a more cohesive understanding of an Ethiopian nation state and its identity over the ethnic nationalism. And that should be supported, and that should take place right after the election. And then there's going to have to be a change in the Constitution, because the Constitution.
Yeah, I mean, I myself, as an artist, can see that art and culture has a big role to play in that. That's where national unity is actually most apparent. You see the unity in art of a nation state. So you see the product of that unity. So that's a call to all artists in Africa, unify your nations.
Yes.
Build beautiful imagery and metaphors to, pull your nation's people closer together through contradictions and through different ironies as well. There are differences. There are all of these, anomalies, but we can use those anomalies to make ourselves stronger. And that's where our uniqueness is. That's what's great about being a nation state. You can have all of those manys as part of the whole. And that's actually the most beautiful thing about that.
And to transcend to the next level, which is being African. So
right.
To take the ethnicity out. In South Africa's case, there's the black-white division.
Yeah.
Well, in certain parts, and then to have this vision of people identifying as African. So therefore, you wouldn't have any of the issues like this with GERD. So it's unity.
My fondest wish as an American, I love the United States. I love what it stands for. I love the founding fathers. We've gone astray. My fondest wish is that we, patriots of the United States, would somehow influence our leadership, which is lacking right now, to understand the importance of a development policy worldwide, but especially for Africa, and to pull back from dangerous geopolitics, which is really taken over the State Department and other entities of the United States. And you see it with Biden's comments in Europe. Let us switch back to what makes the United States great, which is its ability to help others in development, not dictating policy, but long-term, low-interest credit for infrastructure, water, electricity, food, manufacturing. We could change the life of billions of Africans in the next 20 years if my country would get back to its moral standard and implement and support some of these policies. And that, I hope that happens. That's what I'm working for. I just turned 70. I'm going to spend the next 10, 20 years fighting for this policy until it comes about, or until I can't write or speak anymore.
Brilliant. We are so happy to have you. And I can say for me personally, Larry, you've been a great inspiration, reading up on your work and all your years of research and studying and physical activity as well on the continent. It's brilliant to talk to you and to pick away at your mind and have you tell us about all of these things. And I can only, ask people to really pay attention to everything that's just been said and grasp it with both hands and see what you can come to understand further about the continent in general, because it's not the image that we've been given growing up, especially my generation. It is not truthful and it's not accurate. And you can look to people like Larry Freeman as basically one of the best guides on the planet right now to show us what is the reality on the continent and also what is the possibility of the future. I think it's important right now.
Shukran jazilan.
What is that?
Thank you so much in Arabic.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Lawrence. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
All right. Well, we got a conspiracy of 3 here. Let's keep it going.
Absolutely. Let's keep growing. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you to all our listeners.
Thank you, Lawrence.
That's all for
Bye-bye.
today.
Have a good day.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you.